Thank you so much for coming. Good morning, food system experts, scholars, practitioners, policymakers, and family, friends, and colleagues, and those who are simply passionate about our food systems. Welcome to the first SEPA Climate School Food System Symposium. And a few logistical thing first. So under the new Colombia COVID policy, masking is now optional. So panelists, feel free to take your mask off while speaking on stage, but we do strongly recommend wearing your mask while not eating or drinking, because this is expected to be a highly attended event due to our pre-registration. And just to quickly set up the flow for today's symposium, after the opening remarks, we will have 4 panels in total, covering topics of food security and nutrition in changing climate, the present and future of smallholder farming, innovative financing for resilient food systems, and lastly, shifting consumer preferences in the food markets. And in between the first and second half, we will also have the lunch break, and during which we also plan to have a few short speakers. And today's event is organized by 5 passionate SEPA young graduates. There are Morgan and Jasmine from MPA in Environmental Science and Policy, and Juan from MPA in International Finance and Economic Policy, and Gabriel, who is now in here, and myself, both from MPA in Development Practice Programs. And from the very beginning, we gathered together because of our love and passion for the food systems. And for the last couple months, as a team, we planned the whole event from scratch. We brainstormed about the structure of the event, topics that we wanted to cover. We conducted outreach to elevate and diversify panel contents to make sure everyone who chose to spend their precious Friday with us here today could have a wonderful experience and fruitful gains towards the end of the day. And we could never pull this off with only 5 of us. So here on behalf of the team, I do want to acknowledge the support from several individuals and organizations. First, thank you, Kevin Carr, for the guidance and networking for the last couple months. Thank you, Andrew and EE Concentration, stands for Energy and Environment, for the generous sponsorship. And thank you, Glenn and the DP program, for the kind donation. And thank you, Nate, Aaron, and Food System Groups for the helpful contribution. And in general, we want to thank panelists for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here, share your wisdoms and experiences with us here today. And for those who are joining from different time zones, especially in Asia, thank you so much for flexibility and understanding. And we are also honored to have Professor David Sandlow here to give his opening remarks later. David has served in senior position at White House, State Department, and U.S. Department of Energy. And he came to Colombia from the U.S. Department of Energy, where he served as Under Secretary of Energy and Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs. He also co-founded the Food Climate Partnership, and he is currently an inaugural fellow on the Center on Global Energy Policy. But before I hand over to Professor Sandlow, I just want to say once more on behalf of the SEPA community and climate school communities, welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today. And let's welcome David Sandlow to give his opening remark.
Antonio, congratulations. And congratulations to everybody who pulled this amazing event together. I'm so impressed. The food system touches everyone. Hundreds of millions of people work in agriculture, food processing, restaurants every day. Billions of people prepare food as part of their core livelihood every day. And of course, everybody on the planet eats food every day. Much of the past 30 years of my life has been devoted to the fight against climate change. And in this area, the food system is absolutely central. 30% of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere come from the food system. When I first read that statistic, I was astounded, and I think it doesn't get enough attention. Right now, we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and there is no solution to the climate crisis unless we can get to net zero emissions. And we can't get to net zero emissions unless we have net zero emissions in the food system. Lots of work needs to be done in universities, in businesses, in governments, in financial institutions around the world to help the food system get to net zero. And that's core to the mission of the Food Climate Partnership, which Antonio mentioned, which we founded. And if you're interested in this topic, please go to our website at foodclimatepartnership.org. Now, critically, the food system and the climate system, the impacts go both ways. The climate system, of course, has tremendous impacts on the food system. And the threats that rising heat-trapping gases are causing to the food system are profound. Just in the past year, we've seen remarkable droughts, floods, wildfires, and other events that threaten food production around the world. Unless we get a hand on this, we're going to see tremendous hunger, malnutrition, and other problems in the years ahead. And then today's crisis in the Ukraine and in Russia is profoundly related to the food system. As number of commentators have noted, more than 25%, or about 28% of the wheat exports in the world come from Russia and the Ukraine. And among the reverberating implications of this humanitarian terrible crisis is going to be rising food prices, hunger, and potentially political instability around the world. So this event is going to pull together all of these themes and more. Again, I want to congratulate the tremendous student group that conceived of this, that planned this, that have executed this. I have to say, when they first came to us a couple of months ago and said they were going to do this, I was skeptical that they could pull it off, but boy, have they ever pulled together an amazing event. So congratulations. And so to Antonio, Jasmine, Morgan, Juan, Gabriel, have I left anybody off in that core group? Thank you for everything you've done. Congratulations. Now it's really a privilege for me to introduce extraordinary scholar here at Columbia University, who is a global expert on this, Ruth DeFries. She needs no introduction in this group, but Ruth is one of the co-founding deans of the Climate School. She's a professor of ecology and sustainable development at Columbia. She uses images from satellites and field surveys to examine how the world's demand for food and other resources are changing land use throughout the tropics. Member of the National Academy of Sciences, winner of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Award and many other prizes. Ruth, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, David. And thank you to everyone who has pulled off this really, really exciting event. So, greetings to all of you. Greetings to everyone who has joined remotely. I'm really thrilled to be here, especially because this really comes from the students and is it's so inspiring and energizing that the students have taken the lead and decided to focus on this topic out of all the many topics that you could decide to focus on. So thank you. And it is not a trivial undertaking to organize an event such as this. So much, much appreciated. As David said, we're all here because we share a common understanding that food systems are at the nexus of so many critical issues in the world. For this reason, the Climate School has identified food for humanity as one of its priorities, flagship priorities. And you will be hearing today from many of our Columbia colleagues who are participating in our Healthy and Sustainable Food Systems Network, which we encourage everyone to get involved with. So, as David said, food is essential. Everybody eats every day. Food is a biological necessity of our existence. And without surplus food and trade of food, there would be no cities, there would be no modern economy. Food is as critical to civilization, if not even more critical, as energy. And access to healthy food is a fundamental issue of justice. Food systems also lie at the heart of many of today's environmental problems, from water quality to climate change. And it is just astounding that a mind-boggling 40% of the Earth's land surface is taken up by producing food for our one single species. So there is no more complex, intertwined, multifaceted question than how humanity can feed itself and achieve a just and resilient future. And again, I applaud you for taking on this question. It's not an easy question. There's no prepackaged answers, and there are no silver bullet solutions. So I'd like to share a story that, to me, illustrates the problems, potential solutions for food systems. We'll hear a lot about the global statistics. We all know about the global statistics about how broken the food system is today. The quarter of global greenhouse gases coming from the food system, a food system that delivers unhealthy food across the economic spectrum, 1 billion undernourished, 2 billion overweight or obese, biodiversity declines, millions of small-scale farmers in distress. The statistics go on and on. I'd rather tell you a story, and you can take this story as either cup half full or cup half empty, depending on how you would like to look at it. The background to this story is the change in diets over the last decades this is focused in India, where I focus for my research. And many of you who work around the world have probably witnessed the same thing, the changes in diets, the ultra-processed snacks that have permeated into remote villages around the world and hang in those shiny packets, tempting children. The waistlines growing around the world while diabetes cases climb, and the traditional diets based on locally grown crops giving way to convenient, higher status, but likely less healthy alternatives. So colleagues and I have been looking at this question of changing diets in India and its impact on nutrition and the environment. And the trend is very clear. Less nutritious rice has displaced more nutritious and climate resilient traditional cereals such as millets, and this is particularly true across semi-arid areas, other places around the world. This is true also. There's a very complicated political ecology behind this story, but the bottom line is that a diverse variety of climate resilient, less water demanding millets have been displaced by rice. And the result is dramatic loss of nutrients in diets, particularly in the lowest income households, rise in greenhouse gas emissions, increasing water demand, vulnerability to climate shocks, and loss of knowledge about how to grow, store, and prepare these traditional cereals. So these trends are very apparent in a particular place where I focus on the ground in central India. The traditional cereals grown there are a particular kind of small millets, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of varieties throughout the country and throughout the world that are suited to the local climate and the local conditions. One of these small millets is known as kutki. The scientific name is Panucum sumatrense. And if you ask people in the villages there if they eat kutki, they might say, my grandfather eats kutki. I ate kutki when I was a kid. My distant relative still grows kutki, but it is not a part of their daily diet. You won't find it for sale in weekly village markets. You won't find the right kinds of machines in the local mills to remove the husks. It is slipping out of production systems and slipping away from diets. So imagine my surprise when I was in Berkeley, California over spring break, visiting my family, and I wandered into an Indian store. And there on the shelf was a package of kutki, like this. This is what it is. Nicely wrapped, hulled, ready to cook, not particularly cheap. The package doesn't give the location where this particular kutki was grown, but it wouldn't surprise me if it came from this area in central India. So as I saw this packet on the shelf and I reached to buy it, of course I have to buy it, so many conflicting thoughts went through my mind that just reach back to the fundamental problems and maybe some of the solutions about the world's food systems that we are discussing here today. One is from a justice point of view. How is it just and right that I can buy this wonderful kutki when the people from the place where it is the traditional staple crop are feeding their children piles of calorie-rich but nutrient-poor white rice? The irony is that these kinds of millets have become trendy as superfoods. You can buy them in upscale grocery markets. You can find them on the menu of fancy restaurants. You can see recipes for cooking cookie on YouTube. But the trendiness has not trickled down to the people who are most in need of the iron and the other micronutrients that is in these millets. They don't have the access. They get less nutritious white rice from government ration shops and village markets. So that points to one of the absurdities of the current food system. The people who produce the food, almost 600 million small-scale farmers that make up 84% of all farms in the world and produce 1/3 of the world's calories, are the poorest and most food and nutrition insecure. That is just a fundamental absurdity. The farmers who produce the food are the most food insecure. Farming is a grueling, precarious business, made even more risky by climate change. So the solutions, part of the solutions to repair the broken food systems, need pathways for small-scale farmers that make them more financially and nutritionally secure, or provide a transition out of farming if that is what they choose. And I'm delighted to see that one of the sessions today is devoted to small-scale farmers. From a climate resilience point of view, when I saw this package on the shelf, the thought was relief. Wow, that's great. Because this particular part of the world in central India, where this may have been grown, is an extremely vulnerable climate hotspot. Already the monsoon is more erratic, heat spells more frequent, and these millets are the traditional cereal in this region for a reason. They have the physiology as a C4 plant that evolved to be water efficient, withstand droughts, and be appropriate for semi-arid regions. With the Green Revolution, paddy rice expanded, and with that expansion came high demands for water and irrigation. These millets are a much better bet in this particular region when it comes to resilience to climate shocks. If market demand is shifting, if I can buy this for a nice high price and incentivize people to grow millets instead of rice, it's a win for climate resilience. So here there's another session on climate and food, which is great to see. And part of that is that a resilient food system foremost needs to be able to reduce its emissions, but adapt to climate change. And that means growing the crops in the climates that are suitable. And whether we're talking about the Central Valley of California or Central India, correcting the mismatches, the many mismatches that has occurred in the ramp up of production and calories over the last decades is a key part of climate resilience. So some of you may be economists. So key question, how do you incentivize farmers to grow the crops that are most suitable for the particular places? Another climate-related sorts of relief when I saw this package on the shelf was to know that the genetic diversity and the seed sources for these vanishing millets are still alive. There can be nothing more fundamental than the genetic health of the plants and the animals that feed humanity. Again, with the rush to increase yields and the homogenization of diets around the world, that genetic diversity is rapidly eroding. The world gets 75% of its world's calories from just a dozen plant species and 5 animal species. That's astounding. So part of the issues to discuss today is how to keep that genetic diversity alive, which has the clues about resilience to droughts, pests, other climate-related insults on agriculture, and what are the traits that can help adapt to climate change. From a globalization point of view, when I saw this cookie on the shelf, it was just such a reminder of how incredibly interconnected the food system is across the world. We sometimes take that for granted, how much food moves around the world, and how dependent a lot of countries are on a handful of major exporting countries such as the US, Russia, Ukraine, Canada, a few others for their staples. My dinner didn't particularly depend on the ability to buy this package of millets, but urban populations in food importing lower income countries around the world are particularly at the mercy of international prices for imports. And as David said, we are perhaps on the cusp of another demonstration of the ricocheting effect of increasing food prices that we saw in 2008 and 2011. So it's been so interesting to watch the conversation with the Ukraine war and also with the supply chain problems from the pandemic, which has spurred a lot of thinking, even among the most ardent supporters of globalization, about the pros and cons of dependence on imports versus self-sufficiency. And that perhaps is another topic for today. And probably the right answer is somewhere in between. We know a lot of people, we know trade is incredibly important for getting food to people, but extreme dependence also creates vulnerability. So that's another area where there are no easy answers, and there's a lot of nuance to this question. Finally, I'm almost done. From a practical point of view, when I saw this cookies on the shelf, the first thought that went through my mind was should I buy this or not? Should I take it home? Would my family eat it? Would they like it? Would they think it was gross? How could I cook it? I have little grandchildren, so would they think it was gross? Would it take too long to cook? All these sort of practical questions that everyone around the world deals with every day when they're thinking about what to buy and what to cook. So the answer turned out to be, yes, I bought it, I cooked it, they ate it, they liked it, they didn't think it was gross. But it was easy for me to cook because somewhere along the line, the supply chain had the technology in place to dehusk these millets, which makes it possible to just throw them in a pot and very conveniently serve it for dinner. Easy, convenient. But without this kind of technology, the cook, which is, if you're in a village setting, is most likely to be the woman of the household, would need to pound these millets. These are already husked, but if you see them before they're husked, they have a very hard shell. And women need to pound them for hours and hours and hours of very grueling work, lots of drudgery. So no wonder they find it appealing to switch to rice. It's so much easier. You just throw it in a pot and cook it. And you and I would probably do the same. I'm sure I would do the same, even if we knew it was less nutritious and less climate resilient. Which comes to my final point about food systems when we're talking about solutions, is that we know that habits need to change. This is the last session of the day. Habits need to change. Policies need to be directed towards healthier and less environmentally damaging choices. But if these choices are less appealing or less convenient or more expensive, or children will turn up their noses, we will always be swimming upstream and facing backlash. So all the statistics, all the lectures, all the admonishments about the damage from unsustainable food choices probably won't have much impact unless more appealing alternatives are available. So we need to take this just basic reality on board when we're thinking about pathways for the food transition. So I'm sharing this story about this small millet grown in this particular place in central India that appears on a shelf a world away in Berkeley, not because it represents all the food systems and all the places around the world. Every place has its ecological, climatic, cultural, economic setting. Solutions for just and resilient food systems need to be fine-tuned to those settings. There's no global silver bullet kind of solution. We need to get granular and move from the global statistics to think through realistic solutions and appropriate technologies that might work in each place. We see from this example that access and availability is a fundamental issue of justice, that climate resilience means correcting mistakes of growing water demanding crops in the wrong places, climatically inappropriate places, that genetic diversity and knowledge to maintain it are key to resilience, and that a just and resilient food system means that people need to have convenient, appealing choices. So as we go through the day, I'm sure we will touch upon a plethora of problems, many of these issues, and potential solutions for different types of food systems. We're going to hear fascinating, really inspiring talks, and I'm looking forward to it. And but just to reiterate, the problems in our broken food system are so massive, so overwhelming, sometimes seem paralyzing, that we need to see where we can make changes which might work in particular places, might ricochet into other places, but it's very unlikely that there is going to be a single solution. So I hope in this day we come to some practical, realistic, science-driven steps that we can move forward on fixing food systems. As David said, and so inspiring to watch his journey, that a food transition is every bit as important as the energy transition for a just and resilient transition. That's why we're here, and I'm so looking forward to the day. And once again, thank you to the wonderful students who have organized this event.
Thank you for those incredibly interesting remarks. I always learn listening to you. So thanks for inviting her, and thanks for accepting Ruth. I'm delighted to introduce as our next speaker, Glenn Denning, who is a professor at School of International Public Affairs and director of the Master of Public Administration and Development Practice here. At SEPA, Glenn teaches core courses on global food systems and sustainable development practice and policy. Over the past 40 years, Glenn has advised governments and international organizations on agriculture and food policy in more than 50 countries. He's worked at SIGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, and held senior management positions at the International Rice Institute and World Agroforestry Center. SEPA is very fortunate to have him. Glenn, welcome to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. And I'll probably be zooming back up to the 15th floor for this presentation. And the first thing I want you to do is imagine, right? You've all seen this before, I hope, the real thing down there in Central Park. I want everybody to imagine a world where every person enjoys a healthy diet derived from sustainable food systems. Seriously. Just think about a genuinely food secure world where every person gets to consume the right quantity and the right quality of food to live a healthy, active, and productive life. No hunger, no undernutrition, no obesity. In the words of Donella Meadows and her colleagues from their groundbreaking report, The Limits to Growth, which was published 50 years ago, imagine, and I quote, a world where every person has an equal opportunity to realize his or her individual human potential because of what they eat. Now take a further step and imagine a world where the food that was needed for those healthy diets is produced, managed, distributed in ways that do not harm the environment. From production to consumption, try to contemplate food systems that halt environmental degradation and even begin to repair the damage that we've done in our desperate efforts to feed humanity. That is what I call universal food security. A world where every person enjoys a healthy diet derived from sustainable food systems. And as the previous two speakers indicated, we're a long way from that point. In terms of undernutrition, the data, the statistics for stunting, wasting, hunger micronutrient deficiency, food insecurity suggests that 2 billion or more people are falling short when it comes to nutrition. And this has all manner of economic, social, and environmental consequences. So on the other side of the scorecard, as I call it, we've got overweight and obesity, excessive consumption of the wrong products, of the wrong food products. And current estimates are that we're looking at 2.5 billion or more people on the planet who are overweight or obese. So put these two together and even allow for the fact, as Jess Fanzo taught me, that there are many people who suffer both undernutrition and overweight and obesity. We're really looking at half of the world's population malnourished in some form or another, which really, as Ruth indicated, is a very poor reflection on the state of the global food system. Now, on top of that, we have these environmental statistics that indicate what kind of a footprint our food systems have, and whether it be the amount of land that's now dedicated to agriculture, the amount of fresh water that's extracted for agriculture, and the broader food system, that 1/3 of the Earth's surface is degraded. And I think this is a gross underestimation. This may be severely degraded, but surely much more has undergone some form of degradation. Our oceans are overexploited. There's a high level of biodiversity loss. And most recent estimates indicate that 33%, a full third of greenhouse gas, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. The IPCC in its latest report a few weeks ago kind of reiterated messages that I think for most of us in this room are already clear, that the risks will be magnified if warming is unchecked, that adaptation is starting to hit very hard limits, meaning we'll have great difficulty once we pass those limits, and that the opportunity is really closing in order to halt or reverse the effects of climate change. And importantly, the recommendation is that integrated multi-sectoral solutions will be needed to address climate change. So the key message here is that this is absolutely not the time for incrementalism or procrastination. The EAT Lancet Commission that produced an excellent report 3 years ago now called for a great food transformation. And to quote from that, the data are both sufficient and strong enough to warrant immediate action. Delaying action will only increase the likelihood of serious, even disastrous consequences. So I've identified some important principles of food systems transformation. The first is we have no alternative but to be bold and ambitious. As Ruth mentioned, there is no silver bullet, and we need to be looking for synergies and be aware of trade-offs with the interventions that we apply to the transformation. Food systems improvement involves several dimensions: availability, access, utilization, stability, sustainability. And we have to recognize that there are different pathways to getting there, and context is extremely important. We need to respond to local and national expectations. The pathway for New York City is very different to the pathway for rural Malawi. And recognizing that and understanding the different kinds of solutions that are out there and necessary will be essential for our success. I'd ask everyone to be very skeptical when you hear all we need to do is, right? And we often hear, we already produce enough food to feed the world, right? All we need to do is distribute it more equitably, eliminate food waste, change our diets, Well, it's going to require all of these things. And I think that's my main point. There is no single way in which we're going to achieve this universal food security that I would like to see as our vision. There are some important attributes of an improved food system. Just let me mention 7 of these, which I think are the key attributes. The first, and again, this is one that increasingly is kind of overlooked, and that is the food system ultimately has to be productive. Supply must meet demand. And too often, productive is misinterpreted as simply more production. Have to be more productive. Profitable. Profits basically drive decision-making throughout the food value chain. So if basically we want producers or retailers or others in the system to incorporate non-financial, social, or environmental benefits, society has to pay for the difference. Food system transformation requires that we're inclusive. Food security for all people involves everybody in the value chain. Who are we leaving behind? Are we leaving behind women, children, minorities, migrant laborers, landlocked countries? The food system needs to be equitable. It needs to be healthy. And you hear a lot more of that in the next session. It needs to be sustainable. And there are many definitions of sustainable food systems. We hear it all the time. But in reality, no system is perfectly sustainable so long as population continues to grow. Our challenge is that we have to increase and improve sustainability to acceptable levels that don't breach our biophysical capacity to meet our global demand indefinitely. Food systems have to be resilient. And I think of this in terms of the 3 R's, the ability to resist, recover, and reorient. Resilience and sustainability are complementary. Resilience is necessary for sustainability of the food system. And the 7th is ethical. Our food systems should be ethical. Now, the fact that there's controversy and vigorous argument about ethics, it should not deter us from taking on these issues of human rights, of animal welfare, of child labor, workers' rights, fair trade, and other issues of this kind. So food systems transformation means that we need to invest in these food systems, in all food systems. There is no single food system, so that they become productive, profitable, inclusive, healthy, sustainable, resilient, and ethical. And over many years, I've arrived at this basically an investment framework for bringing about the transformation, consisting of 5 core investment areas, plus, as you'll see at the bottom of the screen there, a number of important cross-cutting investments. The 5: sustainable intensification, post-harvest stewardship, market infrastructure connecting farmers to markets, healthy diets, and social protection. Put those 5 together along with these cross-cutting and investments, and we can achieve the type of improved food system that we're looking for. I'm going to focus now specifically on sustainable intensification, not that it's more important than the others, but because of limited time, and it's an area that I've personally spent a lot of time on. So the first question to ask is, do we need to produce more food to meet this demand? We've got all these drivers of population, the fact that we still have persistent hunger, malnutrition, and changing dietary preferences. And we hear all kinds of statements such as we need to double production, we need a 70% increase. Actually, most recently, I've been hearing we need a 25% increase in production. And there are all kinds of uncertainties out there. Uncertainties over population trends, dietary changes, the progress that we're making towards cutting these losses and reducing food waste, and the uncertainties around climate change impacts. Another concern is What happens when we get disruptions of markets, such as the ones we're seeing at the moment? What happens when social protection isn't able to redistribute as we would like to see? All I can say is on this is there really is no clear consensus that I could find. But none of the science-based estimates of future food needs suggest that we can satisfy demand with current production levels. So whether it's 25%, 70%, or doubling, none of them, no serious estimates indicate we're producing just enough as we are right now. So how do we increase production? Basically, we have two options. Intensification, producing more from existing agricultural land, or extensification, expanding the land frontier. And just let me give you a couple of examples from Indonesia, just to make it real. Between 1966 and 1981, rice production in Indonesia increased by 140%. Most of that, 97% of that, came from an increase in rice yield, and about 22% came from an increase in the area harvested. And that was principally through double cropping. So it was largely generating that increase from existing land. In contrast, look at oil palm production in Indonesia between 1990 and 2020. It increased from 11 million tons to 250 million tons, almost entirely through crop area expansion, basically clearing the rainforests. The yield increase over that 30-year period was only 30%. So that's extensification. So this is why I see sustainable intensification as a key part of our strategy, one of those 5 areas. I see it as improving food availability while reducing our environmental footprint to the point where food security of present and future generations is not compromised. But it does not mean we have to go around and intensify every field on the planet. Sustainable intensification should be thought of as a process in aggregate. There are several components to it. Some farms will have to increase in output, either through additional inputs or more efficient use of inputs. Some farms will maintain output, but with a reduced environmental footprint by improving input use efficiency. Some farms will need to reduce output, or in some cases, go out of production altogether, shifting to different types of enterprises that are more suitable. Some abandoned and unproductive lands will need to be restored through strategic use of critical inputs. Natural ecosystems, by and large, should be protected and valued for their environmental services. And of course, as mentioned earlier, we need to reduce our post-harvest losses, because we need to basically generate more net food supply from our land. So it requires very context-specific solutions. So sustainable intensification is going to be very different for large-scale wheat farms like this one in Ukraine, or small-scale maize producers in Malawi. So it's very context-driven. And I've identified a number of important principles that I think can apply pretty much across the board. Improving input efficiency, improving the quality of soil and land, reducing pollution, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing resilience, improving nutrition, reducing post-harvest losses, and ensuring at the same time profitability. And I've given examples for each of these in the context of Malawi. If we wanted to look at these issues in the context of large-scale corn or soybean producers in Iowa, I think we could identify a similar set of solutions, but very context specific, not the same set that we would see right here. So in summary then, basically what I'm arguing, and as I said, I've focused now on sustainable intensification as one of those 5 areas. And I think those others will be covered in various ways by other panels later in the day. I think we should look at these and really work hard to understand and identify opportunities whereby we can address productivity, we can make these systems more profitable, more inclusive, healthier, sustainable, resilient, and ethical. This is the kind of framework I think that will be very important. So finally, I thought I would just add one last slide, and I know Ruth mentioned this as well, and I'm sure other speakers will talk about. I see Michael just walked in the room, and he'll have something to say about this probably as well. But the impacts of the Ukraine invasion, and just some of the things for all of you to remember and to be watching as this unfolds. Reduced exports of wheat, corn, and sunflower, all resulting in high prices. These are high prices on top of the high prices we already had as a result of COVID, and even higher prices that have been building for several years. Reduced exports of fertilizer, again, leading to higher prices and ultimately potentially leading to lower yields. The inability of farmers to respond to food shortages by increasing their production as a result of these higher fertilizer prices. This in turn is compounded by higher energy prices, affecting farm operations and indirectly, of course, affecting fertilizer prices. So the food importing countries will be the hardest hit. And virtually every country in Africa is a food importing country, and many parts of the world. So it's going to be felt way beyond Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. It's being felt in Indonesia. It's being felt in Egypt. It's being felt all over the world. It's being felt in Brazil. The poorest consumers will be the hardest hit. And I should add that food aid, the work of the World Food Programme and others, is even more challenging than it was to begin with. It's much more expensive, much more difficult to source. So, really, we're looking at universal food security being threatened by conflict in this case. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the threats brought about by COVID-19. And of course, climate change and climate variability continues, to really undermine these efforts. And that's why I think events like this, the Food Systems Symposium, is really, really important in terms of raising awareness of these issues, of building capacity and commitment, and establishing all kinds of important partnerships that are needed as we really, go out in this quest for a food secure world. So with that, I'll finish. And again, like others, let me congratulate the organizers. This is great. They did ask me, could this be called the first food systems symposium? The fact that Columbia University has been around since 1754, is it? I don't know. I'm not sure it's the first, but we could call it the first, but it should not be the last. This is an important topic and it needs to stay here and continue in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Glenn, thank you. It is amazing how much content you just fit into a few short minutes of talk. Particularly appreciate your focus on sustainable intensification and much more. Our final speaker in this opening session is Laura Veronica Munoz. She is an ecofeminist climate activist from the Colombian Andean Mountains. She's part of Fridays for the Future, Pacto Ex el Clima, and Unite for Climate Action. Laura, this floor is yours.
So hi, everyone. Thanks to the students who organized this event, especially because these spaces where people at the fringe of academia can have a word are vital. To begin with, I will give meaning to Professor Sandalo's introduction. I'm an ecofeminist climate activist from the Colombian Andean Mountains. And I want to break this down because there is a lot of history behind those words. I'm an activist because I cannot stand the injustice of being forced to move to the cities and leave behind your family, your land, and culture in order to have a life with opportunities, education, and health. And I want to change that. I'm an ecofeminist because gender equity and the elimination of gender violence is intrinsically linked to the care of the territory, nature, and therefore life itself. I'm a climate activist because I grew up and studied in Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia. And therefore, my concerns and political action for the planet have been influenced by the international climate movement, which tends to be very urban. And lastly, but very importantly, I'm from the Colombian Andean Mountains because although I grew up in Bogota, I feel more identified with the Andean region, its history, communities, and culture, especially because my family is from Combita, Boyacá, a small peasant rural town located in the Andean Mountains. It is also important for me to mention that I come from a peasant family, and because of them, I'm all those things. I'm an ecofeminist, climate activist, and I want to emphasize that there are peasants. There are not rural workers, and there are not smallholder farmers. I have been repeatedly told that peasant has a derogatory connotation, that it is better to use other words. On one occasion, I was even told by someone from Fair Trade International that they felt more comfortable just omitting the word peasant. And right now that I'm studying my master's in London, in the niche of imperialism, which is not far from the United States, which is the niche of capitalism and neoliberalism, I have heard several times from people working in the development field saying, and excuse me because they are not my words, but theirs, and I quote, "I will have to work and click like a fucking peasant," or even comments like, "He's a shitty peasant." So today I want to take the opportunity to tell you, please leave the colonial, racist, and capitalist biases and name peasants as such. Not only the word farmer has an industrialized connotation that does not describe who my family is, but also peasant is more than a simple adjective. It is a whole identity. Peasant communities are vital in Colombia and internationally. In Colombia, they not only provide 84% of the food consumed throughout the whole country, but also they contribute enormously to Colombia's national identity by keeping alive ancestral knowledge and traditions that have been in danger of disappearance since colonization in 1492. At the international level, there is a call from peasant organizations and collectives to be recognized as such. In 2018, they achieved the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Peasants. And even so, within international spaces, they continue to be ignored, stigmatized, and called with other labels that are more convenient for the capitalist system. And I mention capitalism because it is this system, along with its different actors that value profit over people and life, who have been historically been responsible for stigmatizing and undervaluing peasant and indigenous communities. Because these peoples fight for their water, so their water is not polluted or privatized. Because they protect the rights to their seats without patents. And because they protect their territories from exploitation and pollution of mining and energy projects. This might seem far from academia, but now that I have the chance to study for a master, that I need to read articles and log in to have access to that private information, I realize that academia, especially white academia, is as responsible as the politicians and bankers and other people who are part of the economic elite who often ignore the social underpinnings of efficient economic outcomes. Academia is an expert in exploiting and theorizing our realities and studying communities as an object to generate knowledge that remains in urban centers, especially in those of rich countries. And although I recognize that the post-colonial and the colonial theories that are now popular, and there is a slight recognition of this structural problem within academia, real action is still very minimal. I think that academia loves to stimulate us and sometimes give us a space to talk, but the participation and agency that we have as BIPOC people is very little. A clear example of the power of academia is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. Just until the IPCC declared a red code alert, the Western world did not believe that we were in the midst of a crisis, when in reality, in countries like Colombia, and in peasant, Black, and indigenous communities, the crisis started a long time ago. For this reason, it is vital that when talking about the climate crisis and the current food system, you go beyond rising temperatures, carbon sequestration, and food security. The climate crisis is also a social crisis because it exacerbates the impoverishment of most people while it enriches a few. It is a cultural crisis because it extinguishes the diversity of cosmovision that keep a close connection with nature. It is also a crisis of violence because the quest for the exploitation of natural resources is only possible by silencing and killing people who defend their lands. It is not a coincidence that Colombia, the most biodiverse country per square kilometer of the whole world, is also the deadliest country for socio-environmental defenders. This crisis started a long time ago, 500 years ago when colonization started. And this fight that we now call climate action has been led by indigenous, Black, and peasants people, and particularly women within these communities. The difference is that now that the crisis is felt in the global north, the crisis becomes a crisis. Meanwhile, peasant communities throughout the whole world have been working in plenty and different strategies to strengthen their food sovereignty, despite the industrial and poisonous practices that they have been imposed. Moreover, peasants work on projects that also protect biodiversity, build nutrients in the soil, restore water, and save energy. So it is crucial that academia break down its barriers, get out of the bubble, and open to other knowledges. Because as the IPCC reports are important to make decisions and policies, the ancestral knowledges of indigenous and peasants communities, along their first experience being in the front line of land and life degradation, should be finally taken into account. This is how I hope this food system symposium, in addition to talking about concepts such as efficiency of food system, nature-based solutions, or resilience, keeps in mind that all these programs and strategies are impossible without the recognition and active participation of local communities. Because, as I said, centuries have passed in which our needs and alerts have been ignored for the profit accumulation of a few. And that action is what brought us to the current situation of the brink of the abyss. Thank you.